The woman who struggles to give birth to a child is a recurring theme in the Bible. We see it repeatedly in the narratives of three of the matriarchs of Israel, Sarah, Rebekah, and Rachel. The theme recurs in the book of Judges in the story of Samson, and again famously in the prophetic portion, our Haftarah, for the first day of Rosh Hashana. In this narrative, Hannah is the central character, and her difficulties are prominent in the story. In the Torah reading from Genesis 21, we saw that God remembered Sarah, fulfilled God's promise to her, and she conceived and gave birth to Isaac. Our tradition associates his birth with Rosh Hashanah. Similarly, the birth of Samuel is connected to Rosh Hashanah. Like Sarah in the Torah narrative, Hannah is troubled by a rival, Pninah, who is blessed with numerous children. Again, like the Torah portion, the Haftarah presents us with a child who will become a leader of his people. But in this prophetic passage, Hannah suffers profoundly not only because she has no children, but also because she is so misunderstood by the men to whom she turns for support. Her husband Elkanah is a man of stature in his community. Each year, he offers offerings to God in the sanctuary of Shiloh. His wife Pninah, their children, and his wife Hannah accompany him each year. We can only imagine how this annual journey must have aggravated Hannah's misery. Each year, Pninah would taunt Hannah, probably parading her several children before her during their stay in Shiloh. Hannah bravely does not respond to Pninah. She weeps bitterly, and she refuses to eat. Unlike her husband Elkanah, we recognize her deep despair. He misreads her agony and tries unsuccessfully to comfort her by saying, Hannah, why are you crying? And why aren't you eating? Why are you so sad? Am I not more devoted to you than 10 sons? I imagine that he was sincere in his attempt to console her. He failed miserably. And so did the priest of Shiloh, Eli. Hannah turns to God in prayer. She vowed that if God would bless her with a son, she would dedicate that son as a Nazirite to God. She continued to weep as she moved her lips in prayer, as she vowed. She prayed fervently and silently without producing a sound. Eli, the religious leader, misunderstands completely. Assuming that she is drunk, he berates her for creating a spectacle. Exhibiting great forbearance, again, Hannah respectfully explains herself. She is certainly not a worthless woman, nor is she drunk from any intoxicant. She is despondent and anguished in pain. When he finally appreciates her situation, Eli restores her well-being by promising that God will remember her request to bear a child. Hannah conceives. She bears a son and she names him Samuel. Perhaps we should understand the name as God heard her plea. When the time for the annual trip to Shiloh arrives, Hannah decides not to accompany her husband. Knowing that she has vowed that her son would serve God throughout his life, she stays at home with him until he is weaned. At that time, she takes him to Shiloh, to the house of the Lord, and presents him to Eli to begin his lifelong service to God. The Haftarah then shifts from a prose account of the sincerity and piety of Hannah in the face of her grief, in the face of taunts and misunderstandings, to a poem of exaltation to God for God's care and righteousness. The dramatic reversal that God has brought in her life leads Hannah to identify several other reversals in the world. God raises the poor from the dust, lifts up the needy from the dunghill, setting them with nobles, granting them seats of honor. Some commentaries rank this poem as more significant than the longer prose narrative of despair and ultimate vindication. In the eyes of the rabbis in the tractate Berachot in the Babylonian Talmud, Hannah's poem of exaltation takes on considerable meaning. They link the ninefold praise of God's name, which she presents, to the 9 blessings of the Amidah of Musaf on Rosh Hashana. And in another passage, they suggest that Hannah's prayer parallels the 18 blessings of the original weekday Amidah. In these two commentaries on the biblical readings for Rosh Hashana, we have noted some similarities between Hagar and Hannah. In the Haftarah for the second day of Rosh Hashana, we will add the matriarch Rachel to this group of central figures in our readings. The late Rabbi David Aronson observed that Hagar, Hannah, and Rachel all wept because of their life situations. When Hagar saw her son Ishmael gasping for water in the wilderness, she said, "Let me not look on as a child dies," and she wept. When Rachel saw her descendants being led off into exile in Jeremiah's vision, she wept bitterly because they were no longer. Hannah also wept because she was childless, but she neither closed her eyes to the tragedy as Hagar did, nor did she content herself with tearful reminiscences of her past when her children were round about her, as Rachel did. Instead of lamenting, she acted. She withstood the taunts of Pninah, she prayed fervently to God, and stood her ground before Eli. Like the Torah portion with which it is paired, this prophetic passage raises significant questions. In the light of Hannah's silence in the face of Pninah's taunts and her measured response to Eli's accusation, should we redefine the meaning of courage and steadfastness? Would any of us have the fortitude to make the annual bitter journey to Shiloh, knowing that our spirits were broken within us? And perhaps more than any other question, we must ask ourselves if we could have faithfully fulfilled our vow as Hannah did. To be blessed with a son, she had to vow to relinquish him. How overwhelmingly painful was her journey to Shiloh with Samuel. How overwhelmingly painful was the fulfilling of her vow by letting go of her son. Let me conclude with this postscript. Hannah's tears accompany her prayers. In the Babylonian Talmud, in the tractate Bava Metzia, we learn that even when all other gates of prayer are closed to us, the gate of tears remains open. Acknowledging this observation, Menachem Mendel, the Kotzker Rebbe, teaches us that there is a gate of tears to teach us that not only are our tears heard, but that we should have the strength to cry.